I hadn't meant to be late, but when she walked into the office lounge, every clock in the world seemed to pause. Her presence filled the room in a way that made the air feel heavier, warmer, almost electric. I didn't breathe at first, I just watched. She was standing by the window, sunlight spilling across her hair like it had always belonged there, the soft gold threads catching in that subtle way that made her seem both untouchable and heartbreakingly human at once. Her name echoed in my mind with every small motion she made. A tilt of her head as she glanced at the city below. A hand brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. There was confidence in her stance, yes, but also a fragility I couldn't name. A quiet vulnerability that drew me closer before I'd even realized I wanted to. I cleared my throat, tried to appear casual, but she turned, and the whole world narrowed down to the space between us. Her eyes, deep and knowing, landed on me, and for a moment, I thought she might see right through the careful mask I wore around everyone else. "You're early," she said, her voice calm, soft, carrying a weight I didn't know how to bear. I smiled, though it probably looked more like a twitch. "I didn't want to keep you waiting." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a step closer, and the faint scent of her, warm, subtle, almost like vanilla and something else I couldn't name, hit me and anchored me to the spot. My hand brushed against hers as I reached for the coffee cup. Just a brush, and yet it sent a current up my arm, up my spine, something unspoken fluttering between us. She didn't pull away. I wanted to speak, to fill the silence with words that might not even matter, but the truth is, words felt dangerous. She tilted her head, lips parted slightly, as if waiting for something I didn't even know I could give. My chest tightened in a way that made it hard to pretend I was merely here for coffee. "Been waiting long?" I asked, keeping my tone deliberately light, though my pulse was anything but. She let a small smile curve at the edge of her lips, one that felt like a confession she didn't quite trust herself to voice. "Long enough," she murmured. And then, her gaze flicked somewhere distant, but her hand lingered near mine for just a heartbeat longer than necessary. I wanted to close the space between us. I wanted to ask her, right here, right now, what all this meant. I swallowed, trying to seem indifferent, and instead my hand grazed hers again, this time deliberately, though carefully. She didn't flinch. The warmth of her skin against mine was like a quiet promise I couldn't name, and I realized I was already thinking in terms of seconds, not minutes. Her eyes found mine again, and that look, so impossible, so laden with meaning, made me forget everything else. I wanted to speak, to reach, to do something irreversibly bold, but before the first word could leave my mouth, the silence was shattered. The office door creaked, a sharp intrusion in the otherwise suspended moment, and we both jumped slightly. Her glance shifted toward it, and for a split second, that delicate balance, the heat, the tension, the unspoken pull, was broken. Yet even as we turned, aware that someone had entered, the weight of that look lingered. I didn't know then how long we'd waited for this, or what waiting had cost either of us. But the way her hand had stayed near mine, even for a heartbeat longer than it should have, told me one thing for certain. We weren't just standing in an office anymore. And in that suspended moment, I felt the world shift, and I knew everything was about to change. The days after that first morning passed in quiet bursts of awareness. I caught myself noticing her in ways I hadn't thought possible. How she smoothed the sleeve of her blouse absent-mindedly, the faint scent of her perfume lingering long after she'd walked past, the way her laughter softened around the edges, like she was careful not to let anyone hear the full sound. She was always just out of reach, not because she didn't want to be close, but because she held herself back with a subtle caution I couldn't name. I wondered what had made her wary, what stories she carried in the lines of her face, in the way she hesitated when someone reached for her hand, in the way her eyes sometimes drifted to places I couldn't follow. I'd caught fragments of her past in idle conversation. A mention of a marriage that ended quietly, of evenings spent alone in a home that felt too large, of friends who had drifted away. And yet, in those moments, she radiated strength, a careful armor around something fragile. I understood, in a way, the quiet guard she kept. I felt a kinship with that restraint, even as it made every glance, every accidental touch, feel like walking on the edge of a flame. There was the age gap, too, a subtle barrier neither of us dared speak aloud. I could see it in the way her hand paused just before touching mine, in the way she smiled at me with a mixture of warmth and hesitation. And I felt it in myself, the tension of knowing this connection might be scrutinized, judged, or misunderstood. Yet the risk only made the moments more intoxicating. The brief closeness, the brush of her fingers along my arm, the faint warmth when she leaned near to point something out on my screen. Yesterday, she had lingered by my side longer than usual, explaining a project, her shoulder brushing mine accidentally, or perhaps not. I tried to look at my screen, tried to focus on the data, but I could feel her presence like a current running through the room. When her breath shifted slightly, near enough that I smelled the subtle trace of her vanilla-scented perfume, I realized I was holding it in, holding myself in, pretending that noticing her, feeling her, wasn't overwhelming. She had smiled then, just a small, knowing curl of her lips, before stepping back as if startled by the proximity. But the pause between us lingered, long enough that my hand itched to bridge the space, long enough that I felt a quiet thrill at the unspoken connection. I noticed her watching me sometimes. When she thought I wasn't looking, her gaze softer than it should be, but never direct enough to call it out loud. And I knew I wasn't imagining it. The brush of her hand, the way she let her shoulders stay near mine for just a heartbeat longer than necessary, the small inhale when she laughed at something I'd said. By the end of the day, the office quieted, and we were both still at our desks, pretending to work. My hand rested on the edge of my laptop, hers on the stack of papers beside me, inches apart. No one else was around. I felt the warmth of her presence, the quiet electricity between us, and in a voice almost too soft for her to hear, I whispered to myself, "She's closer than I've ever been to anyone." And when our eyes met just then, unflinching, lingering, speaking without words, I knew we had crossed some invisible line. The office felt smaller than usual that afternoon, as if the walls themselves were leaning in to watch us. I was explaining a report, my finger tracing lines on the spreadsheet, but I couldn't ignore her leaning over my shoulder, her breath brushing my ear as she whispered something about a missing figure. I froze, heart hammering. She noticed, of course, her eyes lifting to mine in that familiar, unreadable way. For a moment, the room shrank to just the two of us. I could feel the warmth radiating from her shoulder, the subtle scent of her perfume filling the space, her hair brushing against my temple. It should have been enough to make me step back, and yet I didn't. "Here," she murmured, pointing again, hand grazing mine just slightly longer than necessary. The spark from that contact traveled through me, sharp and insistent. My stomach tightened, a dangerous, delicious ache. I wanted to lean closer, to let our faces inch together, to see if our lips would meet, but the sound of the office door creaking froze me in place. "Everything okay in here?" someone's voice asked from the doorway. She straightened instantly, a flush rising in her cheeks. My pulse raced as we both tried to appear absorbed in our work, pretending the small collision of bodies, the lingering heat, hadn't happened. The visitor left, and the tension remained, thick and unspoken, like smoke in a still room. I stole a glance at her, and she met my eyes for a heartbeat too long. There was a question there, or maybe an accusation, and my chest ached with guilt and longing all at once. We were playing a dangerous game, our closeness obvious only to us, and yet fragile enough that a single interruption could expose it. She shifted slightly, just enough that her leg brushed mine under the desk. I swallowed, aware of every tiny movement, every tremor in my own body, of how much I wanted this and feared it at the same time. Her hand moved toward a stack of papers, but lingered there, near mine, teasing the line we weren't supposed to cross. I could almost hear my heartbeat, loud and uneven, matching hers, though she tried to mask it with calm composure. I think that's all for this section," I said, voice tight, hoping it sounded casual. She nodded, but the pause afterward stretched long enough to stretch tension into something almost unbearable. Her gaze dropped to my lips for a fraction of a second before snapping back up, and I felt an almost dizzying pull, a gravity that neither of us could resist. And then, somehow, we ended up closer than ever, leaning in under the pretense of examining the same document. Our shoulders pressed, our faces almost touching. The warmth, the scent, the quiet sound of our breaths mingling, everything screamed for more. But we didn't move beyond that. didn't cross the line. Yet neither of us moved away either. The restraint itself was a thrill, a shared secret that left us suspended between desire and guilt, wanting and fearing, inching closer in every heartbeat while knowing the world outside would never forgive us. And when the door clicked shut behind the last stray visitor, her hand brushed mine one more time, a whisper of contact, a promise, a challenge, and I realized we were both holding ourselves at the edge, too afraid to fall, too tempted not to. The office was quiet, but I could feel the storm building between us. Every glance, every pause, every small brush of hands had been stacking, and now it felt like the air itself was vibrating. She was near my desk, leaning just slightly over me, the faint scent of her perfume filling my senses, distracting every rational thought I tried to summon. "You've been distant," I blurted, more sharply than intended, my voice low, betraying the pull I could no longer contain. Her eyes widened slightly, and I felt that familiar ache, regret, longing, something sharp and impossible all at once. "I'm not distant," she said softly, but her words didn't reach her eyes. They were fixed on mine with an intensity that made my chest tighten. "I'm careful. You have to understand. There are things, past things." I nodded, swallowing hard. I did understand, but understanding didn't make the ache any easier. I noticed how her shoulder brushed mine when she shifted, how her hair fell across her cheek, tempting me to reach out and tuck it behind her ear. My fingers twitched as if they had a mind of their own. Why do we keep doing this?" I whispered, voice low, almost a confession, almost a challenge. Her lips parted slightly, and I could see her hesitation, the conflict in her eyes. The faintest tremor ran through her hand as she brushed it over my forearm. Every nerve in my body screamed at me. "Lean in, close the space, take the risk." I shouldn't," she breathed, barely audible, but her body leaned closer, betraying her words. The warmth of her, the subtle rise and fall of her chest, the brush of her hair against my cheek. It was intoxicating. We stood like that for a moment too long, suspended between what was safe and what we both secretly wanted. I wanted to speak, to confess, to claim the possibility dangling so precariously in front of us, but the world outside our suspended bubble demanded silence. Then she moved slightly, closer, and I could feel the weight of her against me, subtle but undeniable. My voice was barely a whisper as I said, "I've waited." Her eyes caught mine, wide, searching, as if measuring how far we could go without falling entirely. "So have I," she murmured, and the words wrapped around me like a promise and a warning all at once. I wanted to close the distance, wanted to let the rest of the world disappear. I could feel the warmth of her hand near mine again, the soft pressure of her body leaning closer, and the pull between us became unbearable. The moment stretched, every heartbeat amplified, every breath shallow, every thought consumed by the gravity of what might happen next. I leaned just slightly, and she didn't pull away. The air between us seemed to hum. And then, the sound of the office door swinging open cut through the suspended tension like a knife. We froze, still inches apart, our breaths mingling, hands poised, hearts racing. The spell was broken, but not gone. We were on the edge, closer than ever, and the unspoken question hung heavy. Would we wait, or would we finally fall? The office was quieter than usual, only the hum of the air conditioning filling the gaps between our heartbeats. I had been glancing at her all morning, watching her move with that graceful certainty, the curve of her neck catching the soft light, when a message popped up on my phone. I hesitated, curiosity and dread twisting in my stomach, before reading it. It wasn't meant for me. Her name was on the screen, and the words cut sharper than any knife. "I can't believe he's still so close to her. She doesn't know how risky this is." I swallowed hard, my fingers trembling. She was so near. I could feel the heat radiating off her, the soft brush of her hair against my arm as she leaned over my desk. I wanted to look at her, wanted to confront her, but something inside me froze. Then she moved, stepping closer to point out a spreadsheet, and our shoulders brushed. I could feel the tension spike, my chest tightening as if my ribs had been trapped in a vice. Her hand lingered near mine, a tremor I had never noticed before, and I realized that whatever had been said in that message, whoever had sent it, wasn't just a warning. It was a revelation. Someone had been watching. Her eyes met mine, wide and searching, and for a moment the office vanished. I could see the same uncertainty mirrored there that had been quietly building in me for weeks. She wanted to reach out, to touch, to close the space, but something restrained her, something invisible and cruel that reminded us both of the risk. "I didn't know anyone else knew," she whispered, voice low and strained. Her hand brushed mine accidentally, or maybe not, and the electricity that always lingered between us flared hotter than I could contain. I swallowed, stepping slightly closer, feeling the warmth of her body near mine, every movement magnified. "I didn't either," I admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "But it changes things, doesn't it?" She let out a short, almost breathless laugh, shaky and beautiful. "It makes it impossible to pretend we can ignore it." Her hand trembled slightly as she adjusted a pen on my desk, lingering, teasing, sending sparks across my nerve endings. I noticed every micro-movement, the tilt of her head, the quick inhale when our fingers brushed, the soft pressure when she leaned just a little too close. It was all confirmation that nothing between us had been accidental. And yet, every small contact now carried danger. Her eyes softened, searching mine as if begging for permission, for reassurance, for a decision I wasn't sure I had the right to make. I wanted to pull her into the one place we couldn't risk anyone seeing, wanted to let every restraint fall away, but the risk hovered over us like a storm cloud ready to break. Then she took a slow, deliberate step back, but not far enough to release the tension, not far enough to break the connection. Her gaze lingered, and her lips parted slightly. The unspoken choice was there, forward or away, surrender or hesitation. I swallowed again, realizing the next move was ours alone to make, and whatever we did, nothing would ever be the same. The office had emptied, leaving just the two of us and the hum of the lights overhead. Every sound felt amplified. Our breathing, the soft shuffle of papers, the faint click of her heels as she moved closer. I could feel the pull between us like a physical force, one I could no longer deny. She leaned against the edge of my desk, shoulder brushing mine, hair falling forward so that it tickled my cheek. I wanted to reach out, to tuck it behind her ear, to close the infinitesimal distance that had stretched between us for weeks. Her eyes met mine, wide, searching, a quiet question lingering there that demanded an answer I couldn't evade. "I can't," she whispered, voice trembling slightly, and yet she didn't move away. The words hung in the air, fragile and electric, while every fiber of my body wanted to step closer, to lean into her warmth and risk everything. I swallowed, voice low, almost a murmur. "Neither can I." My hand hovered near hers, almost touching, as if suspended by invisible threads. The temptation was unbearable. The air between us felt charged, each heartbeat echoing the other's, each breath mingling in the small space that separated us. She shifted, just slightly, and I felt the weight of her body leaning into mine. Her shoulder pressed a little closer, her hand brushing mine in a fleeting, deliberate touch. The closeness was intoxicating, warmth radiating, breaths mingling, time suspended. I wanted to close the distance completely, wanted to erase the restraint that had kept us hovering at the edge for so long. Her lips parted slightly, and the tension snapped, sharp and undeniable. "Do we?" she began, voice barely audible, eyes locking on mine. "Do we risk it?" I didn't hesitate. I stepped closer, so close I could feel the heat of her, smell the subtle trace of her perfume, hear the faint catch in her breath. "Yes," I whispered, the word carrying everything I'd felt and held back. The hesitation melted, replaced by the clarity I hadn't known I needed. Our fingers intertwined instinctively, small but insistent, a tangible confirmation of unspoken promises and long-suppressed desire. The world outside the office, the judgment, the risk, it all faded. Only the two of us remained, suspended in a space where every glance, every touch, every breath was amplified into something exquisite and dangerous. We didn't need words anymore. The distance closed, not with urgency, but with certainty. Every tremor, every small shift in our bodies spoke for us. The tension that had built over weeks, months, dissolved into the quiet understanding of two people finally acknowledging the truth they could no longer resist. And in that moment, close, raw, human, and irrevocable, we finally understood each other fully. The waiting, the hesitation, the fear, it had all led to this. We didn't move beyond that edge yet, but the line had been crossed in the only way that truly mattered. Our hearts, our bodies, our desire aligned. The morning light spilled across the office floor, soft and forgiving, illuminating the quiet space where we sat together. Not side by side, not yet pressed impossibly close, but close enough that the warmth from her shoulders seeped into mine, enough that our hands found each other naturally, fingers entwined without a single word. We didn't speak at first. There was no need. The tension that had defined every stolen glance and lingering touch over the past weeks had dissolved into something steadier, quieter, but infinitely more profound. I could feel her breath against my hand, the subtle rise and fall of her chest when she shifted, and the warmth behind her eyes that had always drawn me in. "I was afraid," she murmured finally, voice low, but with a softness that made it feel like confession and reassurance in the same breath. "Afraid this wouldn't feel real, that it was just infatuation." I smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "It's real, more than anything I've felt." My thumb brushed over her knuckles, a small gesture loaded with everything we hadn't said. She leaned closer, letting her head rest lightly against my shoulder, the faintest weight that somehow grounded me. I could feel the subtle tremor in her hands as they remained clasped with mine, a quiet acknowledgement that the walls we had built around ourselves were coming down, brick by careful brick. "The age difference," she whispered, as though testing the sound in the room. "I was worried, I know," I said softly, resting my forehead against hers, closing the last inch of space between us. "Me too. But none of that matters if we're here now, together." Her lips curved into a small, genuine smile, the kind that reached her eyes and softened everything around us. I felt her exhale, a quiet release of all the tension we had carried, and I mirrored it. The office no longer felt like a cage of risk and judgment. It felt like a space we had claimed together, a small universe where our connection wasn't forbidden, just ours. We stayed like that, hands intertwined, foreheads touching, hearts finally in sync. Every small tremor of her fingers, every shift in posture, every silent laugh between us spoke volumes we didn't need words to express. The lingering attraction, the forbidden pull, had transformed into something steadier, something human and undeniably ours. When we finally pulled back just enough to look at each other, the light caught in her eyes, reflecting a quiet joy, a sense of safety I had only imagined. I reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face, a soft, deliberate gesture. Her smile deepened, and I knew that whatever had begun as hesitation and risk had grown into something real, something worth savoring without fear. We didn't need anything more to be certain. The world could wait. Here, together, was enough. And in that quiet moment, suspended in shared warmth, I whispered, "We've waited for this, and now we don't have to wait anymore." She smiled, a small laugh escaping her lips, and leaned in just a little closer, letting her head rest against mine again. Speech Balloon, did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?